In the darkest days of World War II, one name rose above the battlefield, echoing through the chaos like a thunderclap: General George S. Patton. The Allies had many leaders: Churchill with his speeches, Roosevelt with his politics, Eisenhower with his calm command. But there was one man who stood apart, a soldier's general, a warrior who lived for battle. And in the heart of the Kremlin, even Joseph Stalin knew his name: Patton. To the Soviet dictator, Patton was more than an American officer. He was the embodiment of everything Stalin feared: speed, aggression, and a relentless will to strike first. Patton didn't wait, he didn't hesitate, and he never asked permission. Where others planned, he attacked. Where others stalled, he charged. And the world watched in shock as his armies tore across Europe with a fury that seemed unstoppable. In 2018, the world remembered Sudan as the last of his kind. But in 1945, Stalin was watching another last of his kind, a warrior whose presence alone could shift the balance of power. This is the story of General George S. Patton, the man Stalin secretly feared. George Smith Patton Jr. was not born into obscurity. From his earliest years, he was obsessed with war, strategy, and the glory of battle. A descendant of soldiers, he saw himself as destined for greatness. As a young man, he chose the cavalry, drawn to speed, discipline, and the clash of steel. But unlike many of his peers, Patton was not stuck in the past. He saw the future. Where others clung to horses, Patton embraced machines. He studied tanks when most generals dismissed them as toys. To him, armored warfare was the battlefield of tomorrow. He believed that wars would be won not by slow advances, but by speed, shock, and overwhelming force. An army, he once declared, is only as fast as its tanks. Patton's reputation grew quickly. He was harsh, demanding, and utterly intolerant of weakness. He cursed, he shouted, he punished. Soldiers feared his wrath, but they also admired him, because behind the fury, Patton cared deeply for victory, and for the men he led into hell. He trained them harder than anyone else. He demanded discipline at the highest level. And when the shooting started, his soldiers realized something extraordinary. Patton's methods worked. To them, he was more than a general. He was the razor's edge of war, the embodiment of ruthless efficiency. He was the man who would stop at nothing to win, and that reputation would soon shake the entire world. Patton's battlefield genius became legendary almost overnight. His first major test came in North Africa, where American forces were floundering after a series of defeats. Chaos reigned, morale was low, and the enemy was pressing hard. Patton arrived, and with his trademark energy, he whipped the army into shape. He reorganized, pushed forward, and struck with precision. Within weeks, the tide had turned. What seemed lost was suddenly regained, and the world began to take notice. Next came Sicily. In a campaign that required lightning speed and impeccable coordination, Patton's forces moved faster than anyone expected, even outpacing Allied commands. Town after town fell, roads were seized, and the Italian campaign became a showcase of his audacity. But it was in Europe, 1944 to 1945, where Patton truly carved his name into history. His famous dash across France, the so-called Patton's Dash, left both enemies and allies breathless. His Third Army pierced the German lines with stunning speed, capturing towns, bridges, and prisoners far beyond any strategic forecast. Then came the Battle of the Ardennes, the German counteroffensive known as the Battle of the Bulge. With Allied forces encircled and desperate, Patton performed a maneuver that became textbook strategy. In mere days, he pivoted the Third Army 90 degrees, cutting through enemy lines and rescuing trapped units. Soldiers who witnessed it spoke of near miraculous timing, relentless energy, and sheer audacity. Academies still study it as a masterpiece of operational warfare. Every victory enhanced his reputation, both inspiring and intimidating. To soldiers, he was fearless. To enemies, he was a nightmare. And to world leaders, including Stalin, Patton was becoming a figure impossible to ignore, a man whose skill and audacity could alter the course of history. When victory in Europe seemed certain, Patton's vision took a controversial turn. Unlike many Allied leaders, he did not see the Germans as the ultimate threat. Instead, he openly warned that the true danger lay to the east, the Soviet Union. "We fought the wrong enemy," he declared in speeches and private meetings. "We should have fought the Russians, not the Germans." These words were not whispered in secrecy. Patton's warnings were blunt, direct, and unfiltered. He criticized the Allies' slow response to Soviet maneuvers, questioned Roosevelt and Churchill's strategies, and argued that post-war Europe could not trust Moscow. American intelligence documented his speeches, but it was Soviet spies who paid the closest attention. Reports were sent straight to Stalin, noting that Patton's rhetoric was not mere talk. He advocated for preparedness against the USSR, predicted potential conflict, and questioned the wisdom of Allied policies. One dispatch from Moscow bluntly stated, "General Patton is openly advocating for war with the Soviet Union." For Stalin, this was alarming. Here was an American general respected and feared for his tactical brilliance, a man who could mobilize armies with unmatched speed and precision, openly suggesting that the United States should prepare for a new confrontation, this time with the Red Army. Patton's words reverberated beyond politics. They created tension between Moscow and Washington, sparked debates in military circles, and contributed to his growing reputation as a man too outspoken, too bold, and dangerously independent. He was no longer just a war hero. Patton had become a symbol of power, a reminder that a single individual, armed with vision and audacity, could challenge even the world's most formidable leaders. By the time the Yalta Conference convened, Patton's reputation had reached the highest corridors of power. He was a man of unparalleled audacity, whose straightforwardness bordered on recklessness. While Allied leaders negotiated delicate post-war plans, Patton's blunt warnings about the Soviet threat did not go unnoticed. Rumors swirled in the Kremlin. Stalin himself demanded that the American general be monitored closely. His advisors reportedly whispered in Moscow, if Patton had the power, he would start World War III tomorrow. To the Soviets, Patton was not merely a skilled tactician. He was a wild card, a man whose speed, decisiveness, and aggression made him unpredictable and dangerous. American commanders understood the paradox. Patton was invaluable on the battlefield. Without him, the liberation of Europe might have been slower, bloodier, and far less certain. Yet, his outspokenness made him politically dangerous. He defied diplomatic caution, often criticizing both the Allies and the Soviet Union without hesitation. In military circles, he was revered. Among politicians, he was feared. And in Moscow, he became a figure of anxiety. Stalin's intelligence reports portrayed him as a general whose brilliance was matched only by his potential threat to the fragile post-war order. Patton's very presence reshaped calculations. Commanders debated strategy not just against remaining German forces, but against the possibility that Patton himself might accelerate confrontation with the Soviets. His reputation as a warrior who could change the game made him both an asset and a danger. Even after victory in Europe, the shadow of Patton lingered. He was a reminder that one man's courage, audacity, and tactical genius could stir fear at the highest levels, even in the heart of the Soviet Union. Stalin's nightmare was not a dream. It was real, and it had a name: George S. Patton. December 1945. Europe was at peace. The guns had fallen silent, and the Third Army's banners no longer marched through occupied towns. But one man, who had shaped battles and struck fear in the hearts of the world's greatest leaders, was about to vanish from history. George S. Patton. On a cold December day in Germany, Patton was involved in a seemingly ordinary automobile accident. Injured, he never recovered, and the general passed away shortly thereafter. Officially, it was ruled an accident, a tragic end to a brilliant military career. Yet whispers lingered. Some believed it was not chance, but deliberate elimination. For Stalin, a man who had long feared Patton's audacity and foresight, the general's death may have been a quiet relief. No longer would the American commander speak freely of Soviet ambitions. No longer would his armies pose a potential threat to post-war calculations. Historians still debate the circumstances. Was it fate? Or a shadowy hand guiding history to remove a dangerous force from the chessboard of global power? Patton's legacy, however, could not be erased. Tales of his bold maneuvers, his lightning campaigns across Europe, and his unyielding spirit continue to inspire military leaders. He remains the general who terrified adversaries, inspired allies, and captured the imagination of the world. Even in death, the shadow of George S. Patton looms large. Stalin may have breathed easier, but the story of the man he secretly feared, the general who moved faster, struck harder, and refused to bow to anyone, lives on. George S. Patton, warrior, legend, and Stalin's nightmare.